My name is Richard Barlow. I live in Oneonta, New York, where I teach drawing and painting at Hartwick College. For the past several years, the primary mode of my art making has been these large, temporary, site-specific chalk wall drawings. These wall drawings are always of landscapes, typically from photos I take myself. And because they're chalk drawings directly on blackboard paint, they are temporary, ephemeral, fragile, and easily damaged by our presence in the gallery. So all of these things kind of map onto ecological concerns that our presence might damage these landscapes. And then there's also the sort of existential idea that everything is fleeting and that, I, among others, have to make peace with the fact that this will be going away. In the current piece here, there's a slight difference. This piece was inspired over the last couple of years when I was driving back from the Hudson Valley to Oneonta. I often found myself seeing out the side of my car this distinctive looking mountain peak in the distance, and it just would show up between a couple buildings outside Middleborough, and then I would not be able to see it anymore. And I was trying to figure out what it was, and this is the peak here. Its name is Vroman's Nose, and I eventually realized the reason it looked so familiar was that it is the peak that is in the background of Thomas Cole's Course of Empire series. The Course of Empire was painted, I believe, in the 1830s. It's a series of 5 paintings tracking the trajectory of a sort of imaginary empire that is an allegory for Cole's sort of anxieties and cynicism about the rise of American empire. The empire in his paintings looks more classical, sort of Greco-Roman kind of era, and throughout them, in the background, there's this distinctive wedge-shaped mountain peak that is always there. And at the end, the empire falls, there's a scene of devastation, and still the mountain is there. So there's some sort of message there about, man's achievements and how fleeting they are compared to the natural world. So as I was looking at this peak and thinking about it and thinking about whether I could work it into a series, I kept thinking this sort of strange false chronology where, in his series, the mountain is still there, and yet 150 years later, it's still there, and I'm still seeing it. It's still outlasting this dead empire at a moment when, frankly, there's some sort of anxieties about American empire again. And so I was sort of thinking about that, thinking about how to make images of it. And so I should talk a little bit about how I structured this image. I've made 2 of these now. One is on display at the Opalka Gallery, in which the peak is sort of surrounded by my sort of a vignette of branches, very kind of 19th century compositional trope. And coming in here to the Institute, I had this wall with this door that presented a little bit of a challenge compositionally, but again, I tried to sort of use some 19th century compositional tools with the framing, with the trees on either side to make this piece. In designing it, I went to Vroman's Nose. I took multiple photos of it from various locations, took images of the trees and fields around it. And then what I tend to do is take all of that into Photoshop and with 20 or 30 images and layers, build a compositional plan, and then come into the gallery to execute it. So when I was offered this wall with the door right in the middle, it presented a little bit of a compositional challenge. I knew that the key image, the sort of focal point for me was this mountain peak. I wanted the image to really be essentially about that and be framing that, and having it have to be on one side or the other of the doorway gave me some compositional challenges. So as I said before, sort of used trees on either side to frame it, but in order to balance this peak, which is sort of a heavier thing on the left side, I brought in these posts from a farmer's field. So there's this line of posts, which are kind of forcing perspective and our view towards the right, which sort of balances out this heavy image on the left. In the 2 pieces, the first version of Cenotaph that's at Opalka and this piece here, the mood is slightly changing. I'm thinking a bit of the progression in Cole's pieces where, again, an empire rises and falls. And so I wanted the mood in these, as I make more of them, to change. So in the piece at Opalka, it's a little bit sunnier, a little bit more saturated, brighter color, and the sky is a bit sunnier as well. So in this piece at the Institute, the color's a little more desaturated, a little darker, and the sky is a little bit stormier. And so that is sort of trying to create a little bit a different mood or a sort of progression from one piece to the next. The other difference between these couple of pieces and previous chalk wall drawings I've done before is, whereas the other works, their fragility was sort of latent. It was possible they could get erased, and then at the end of the show they were erased. In the case of these two pieces, what I'm going to be doing is, over the course of the run of the exhibitions, I'm going to come back and I'm going to slowly damage and erase the drawing as well. So that will be sort of performed within the gallery over the run of the exhibition. I should talk a little bit about how I execute it. So I have this image. I use a projector to scale it up to make sure I get things where I want them. And then the wall is painted with a custom mix that I work with golden acrylics to make. It's basically a blackboard paint that I can make whatever color I want. And then I use plain old Crayola teacher's white chalk to draw on the wall. If you look closely at the wall, you'll see that I'm not really using lines or filling in any solid areas. What I'm doing is riding the bumpy surface from the roller that paints the wall. And if I push harder or lighter, I get more or less dots, or bigger or smaller dots. And so it's sort of like a stippling effect, or I often think like film grain, which I think is part of why these works at a distance or when photographed look so much like a photograph. I think they almost work the way photographs do as far as how the grain functions. So I came in, again, I came up with this compositional plan and made this image. And in order to sort of think about, again, as I said before, I'm thinking about this mountain still there as like a silent witness to the passing of time or the rise or fall of empire. And so to sort of tie that into the idea of the course of empire without being too obvious about it, I titled it cenotaph, which is sort of a classical world term for a monument to the unnamed dead of the empire, essentially. So I'm sort of thinking that this mountain is silently witnessing where we've gone since Cole. It's a real honor to be part of the exhibition here, The Artists of the Mohawk-Hudson, and I hope that you'll manage to come in and see these works in person. This is an excellent show. I want to thank you for your time, and if you would like to see more of my work, you can find some online. Thank you.